Okay.
Perfect.
Hello, everyone.
Everybody. And Maria, let me just quickly say something.
Sure.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session. Because we can only show, we have 9 panelists today, and we can only show 6 people at any given time. What I suggest for everybody to do is go up to your upper panel, and where it says everybody, it has like a picture, just select view who's talking. In that respect, it will rotate amongst us. And with that, I'll let Maria take over. Maria, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me?
And you need to turn your camera on, Maria. Yes, we can hear you. Please turn your camera on.
Okay. So can you? Okay, awesome. Hello, everyone. And thank you all for joining us for the panel discussion, diversity and inclusion in the geosciences. This session is particularly relevant considering recent events in the United States, including the violent deaths of George Floyd and other Black lives, which highlight the systematic discrimination and racism persistent in the US and globally. The horrific event of the past several months confront us with the depths of ongoing inequality, discrimination, and bias. Also, their promotion of inclusivity and diversity in science is in our core of the Geochemical Society mission. We must redouble our ongoing efforts to provide an inclusive and supportive professional environment free of discrimination and harassment. And with this, hello, Adina?
Yeah, go ahead. Thank you, Maria. And let me turn my camera on. I'm clicking, but no one's, there we go. So even though it says down there, Maria, this is actually Adina speaking. We had to log on using the same link. Anyway, I hope everybody has had the chance to listen to the 4 presentations in this session. And I'm sure people have a lot of questions for the speakers and the panel members that generously share their thoughts and experiences, and we'll do that continuously in the next hour and a half. Before we start, I would like to quickly mention who's on our panel and how this discussion will be managed. So the people on our panel are the 4 speakers that presented their work. Asmaret, who talked about the advanced program, Kohli, who focused on institutional policies, Marjorie, who talked from a broad society perspective on the issue, Rosie, who talked specifically about working with indigenous communities. And in addition to these 4 speakers, we have 5 additional panelists here. Brandon Jones from the National Science Foundation, who is really pushing and organizing a lot of the NSF programs for expanding diversity and inclusion in the geosciences. We have Claudia from the ERCEA, and she will bring a perspective from Europe. And Rie Hori will bring her experience from Japan. Then we also have Rocio and Rachel, who will present postdoc and student perspectives on this issue. And with that, I want to quickly say how we are going to manage this panel. All the speakers have their phones and cameras on. Everybody else is muted. If you have questions to the whole panel or to specific speakers, on your GoToWebinar, there's a little chat symbol. You can type your chat or on the chat your questions, or you can raise your hand. And if there is not too many hands raised, we will call upon you. As I said, open only the who is talking, so you can see the panelist that is responding and not the whole panel because there's no way to see all of us. In addition, there is a dedicated discussion room on this course communication facility. It's called Diversity, and you can continue the discussion there later. If you're using this discussion room, please be sure to confront with the etiquette of communication that way. So with that, I will go back to Maria, who will start asking the questions. Our first question is for all of the panelists, and we will, once the question is brought up, we will go ahead and call each panelist to respond individually. Maria.
Hello. We have two questions for all the panelists speakers. And first of all, we would like to start with an interactive session by asking all panelists to first quickly introduce themselves very quickly and share us first how the last events have impacted them, and second, why they have invested time and effort to increase diversity in the geosciences as a part of their career and life. So with that, I will switch off my screen and we will start maybe with Ehime Asifo. Okay.
Thanks, Maria. So to kind of generally address the point, first of all, I want to say thank you to Adina and Maria for organizing this session. This was set up well before the latest incidents that has sparked a lot of conversation in our community and beyond about Black lives, and as well as general discrimination and structural racism in society and the academy. So I really want to acknowledge the fact that they thought about this ahead of time and tried to set this conversation going. So I'm Ehime Asifo. I'm a professor of soil biogeochemistry at the University of California in Merced. And I am a geoscientist who mainly works on soil organic matter, carbon cycling kind of issues. But today I want to talk about diversity and the lack of diversity rather in our field, which is very disheartening, a persistent issue that has been going on in our community for a long period of time. And generally speaking, myself, I strive to contribute towards closing the diversity gap in my field and in STEM in general by trying to direct my efforts towards mentoring, sponsoring students and other junior scholars, and addressing issues of bias, hostility, and discrimination in academic institutions and scientific workplaces in general. And I say this because I view workplace climate and toxic workplace cultures around unfair, discriminatory treatment of, in particular, Black and Indigenous people in academic institutions is having a major issue in limiting not just who's entering our scientific community, but also who's able to stay and thrive in academic institutions and in our research community and scholarly community in general. So I think this is one of the major things we can do to address this persistent lack of diversity, in my opinion, is look inwards and think about the climate in our academic institutions. And I hear an echo. I don't know if everybody does hear that too. So
if the other speakers close their microphone and turn them on only when they're talking, that will help.
Yeah. Do you want me to address both questions ahead of time, Adina, or just stop here?
Yeah. No, you can continue the question and then we'll move to Kohli after you.
Okay. And the second question that was pointed to me was about what helped me personally in trying to navigate this world where there weren't really that many people that looked like me, that never were in my scientific community, in the geosciences in general, that has continuously lacked diversity. And I think, to me, if I have to point to one important variable, it's community. Supportive network of mentors, including peer mentors, but also senior mentors that were there to support me and provide a community that I needed to be successful in STEM. And of course, it helps to make sure that marginalized community scholars from marginalized and minoritized communities can focus on our work and build strong CVs like everybody wants to do, right? But that requires that we actually be working in healthy workplaces that have healthy climates, where we can actually focus on the work that we went there to do, instead of having to suffer the negative impacts of toxic workplaces. But in conclusion to this, I want to quote one strong statement that I think Toni Morrison made in some of her kind of works, that highlights the fact that I'll just state it. Toni Morrison put the role and impact of discrimination and harassment best when she wrote that the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reasoning for being. None of this is necessary. There will always be one more thing, right? So this distraction of racism affects minoritized scholars starting from our time as students in the academy, and when we begin to be saddled with this distraction, while at the same time we're expected to achieve technical proficiency and gather professional experience.
Rachel, can you mute yourself?
Sorry.
Rachel, can you mute yourself?
Sorry.
Okay.
It's a tough undertaking to balance. It's a tough undertaking to balance this distraction with work that minoritized scholars enter academic institutions to do. And so I want to acknowledge that it's hard for me and everybody else to be able to deal with this distraction that these acts burden us with emotionally, physically, and intellectually. And so probably the best that we can all do is try and address these workplace climates that continue to perpetuate this problem. I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you,
and I'll
Asmer.
unmute myself.
Thank you, Asmer. As you saw that her name is wrong there, we can't really change that. Both me and Asmer have wrong names associated with us because we used the wrong thing to connect. Our link didn't work well. Okay, I think, Maria, do you want to invite the next panelist?
Yes, maybe I would like to invite Rosie. You are just on my screen. And maybe we will go to the idea to answer two first questions, and then maybe the questions and we will do one round with this first two questions, and then we will go to that talk. So please tell us about how the last events have impacted you, and why do you have invested in this issue? So thank you, Rosie.
Aloha mai kako, aloha e naho, aloha mai kalahiki a kalakau. My name is Rosie Allegado. I'm native Hawaiian, and I'm an associate professor of oceanography and sea grant at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And my greeting this morning was just to greet you from the rising to the setting of the sun. So these past events have really kind of, so both of my parents are academics. Both of my parents are professors at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and that has really conferred onto me the privilege of understanding and having the confidence and security to know that you can be a minority in academia. being a minority in STEM is actually, you know, quite a different thing, but I always kind of walked in my path knowing that I had the confidence that, but because both my parents had did it, they were the founders of the ethnic studies department in their university, and the entire department was also minority. I knew that minoritized people had a place in the Western academic realm, and had a very useful and necessary role in challenging the, you know, the normative discourses. So these past couple weeks have really reminded me of the things that I grew up learning, because both my parents were grassroots activists and organizers, and I felt just a lot of solidarity with the events that were going on, and it reminded me that, you know, so often I think in STEM, as a minoritized person, you're very much encouraged to try and encourage others who are minorities to enter into the field that you're in, to always put a positive spin. And what has been really relieving for me personally in these past weeks is that we've been able to have very authentic, deep conversations, kind of ripping off the band-aids and getting into the wounds that we kind of all walk around with, but try and kind of hide some of our scars. And so it's actually been quite liberating to be able to talk about both the, you know, the love that we have for our science, but also the pain that we've been carrying around. And, you know, I just want to express that we've had so much solidarity for, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement, and it has really resulted in shifts in our department, and it's allowed us to have these really painful conversations. So, you know, I'm really proud of the fact, for example, that my school was able to craft a very strong anti-racism statement where we, this is the School of Ocean, Earth Science and Technology at University of Hawaii at Manoa, where we were able to actually kind of evaluate what are the steps that we've actually taken towards being anti-racist, towards being inclusive, but also acknowledging where we're not doing well. And so I'm really glad that we're beginning to have those conversations, you know. And then why, you know, to the second question of why do I invest so much time in an effort to increase diversity in the geosciences? One, it's kind of very personal and very selfish, is that I want my children to be able to do whatever they want to do. Number two is that even though I was raised in Hawaii, I am part of a diaspora that left Hawaii and went and got educated on the mainland, on the continent, because there's always this feeling, and I think it is related to racism, that the education that you get where you are is not good enough, and you have to go away to the Western academies and become legitimized before you can return home. And so it's really critically important that I stand and hold these spaces so that my own students, now local students, can feel that they have the right and that they have the space and that they can bring their whole selves to their science. So it goes to my students, it goes to my children, it goes to my community, and even broader further, it's because I know that there are other knowledge systems, not just the Western academic framework, that hold really important knowledge and wisdom for the geosciences. I mean, particularly in Hawaii, particularly in the Pacific, we have this very deep intergenerational knowledge about oceanography, atmospheric science, and geology. And it's critically important that those knowledges are held to equal measure as to, you know, the most cutting edge science, and that we are able to leverage both of those knowledges, all of those knowledges, to be able to solve the most important problems that our society faces now. So, mahalo.
Thank you so much, Rosie. So, may I ask Kohli, can you add your opinion on these two questions, please? And
yes,
thank you for coming.
Not at all. I'm so sorry, I had connectivity issues, so I had to actually restart my computer while you were talking. So I'm guessing the question we're talking about is how these recent events have impacted us, and, you know, why we've invested our time and effort to do this. Am I correct?
Yes, exactly.
That's
exactly.
Yeah. So I've been Both, I think, both personally and professionally impacted by the recent incidents. I'm the diversity officer for Lamont, which is, a geoscience campus, which is predominantly white. And it was, the recent events just brought to the surface a lot of things that, should have probably been discussed earlier in many ways, but there wasn't that space to discuss it. And about a year ago, our community was forced, the Lamont community was forced a little bit to discuss it because we had a racist email incident that attacked our Black students. And so that was the first time we delved into this very uncomfortable topic of discussing race and racism. Because typically, when you have an all white dominated space where there's conditioning for people to not talk about racism, it's something that's usually not spoken about or viewed as other. And so the start of having these very difficult, uncomfortable conversations made it very clear to us that that's exactly what needs to happen on a much larger level and a much bigger scale for meaningful change. And part of the issue is exactly that, investing our time and effort at a moment like now, with everything that's happening around us in a national moment, that we need to invest our time and effort in a way that makes this moment count, that it shouldn't be that, well, people are talking about it now and there are, protests and slogans and marches and so on, and then it's just a matter of time before everyone goes their merry way again and the subject is forgotten. So I think it's up to each one of us to make sure that this subject stays on the radar and that we keep pushing to have these really uncomfortable conversations that are needed so that people understand the concept of systemic racism and how badly it impacts all of us. And the geosciences in particular, as you know, I mean, it has not a very inclusionary culture, and you have, whether it's people of color, whether it's women who tend to leave at higher rates than others. So there's definitely an inclusion problem in the culture.
Thank you so much. And maybe Margie, maybe you can come in and switch on your camera. We will be happy to see you.
This is Margie, and I don't know if
Hi, Margie.
it will allow me to share my webcam.
Yes,
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah. Hey.
All right. I'm Marjorie Chan. I'm a clastic sedimentologist and distinguished professor of geology at the University of Utah. And I've actually been the head of several diversity committees to promote a number of initiatives, including the prowess of American Association of Petroleum Geologists, as well as the On to the Future program for the Geological Society of America. The issues that have happened recently have really profoundly made me think harder about racism. And it's made me think more about the name calling that I experienced as a kid, to some of the interactions that I've had over the years in my education, to being the token female and minority on so many committees in my entire career. And the reason why I've been involved in diversity issues is because there need to be more people that are like me and like so many of our underrepresented groups. And what I've realized is that too many people have been excluded for too long in STEM. And the problem is that science now is so global, there's so many issues that are interrelated, that really the best way to tackle societal problems is to have the broadest perspectives with the most diverse workforce that we can get. And the minority groups in particular are a significant part of our population, and we need to tap into that rich pool of human creativity and resourcefulness and ingenuity. And for me, I would like to really see geosciences be the one group that helps turn it around fast. We've always been a group that has had a very broad view. We have a broad view of sciences. We understand a lot about the interrelationships, about spatial relationships, about visualization. And I think we have a real talent for looking into the future and being able to deal with all kinds of data and gray areas, but we can see the big picture. And I'm really hoping that we can use this opportunity to bond together in all of our subdisciplines, our total discipline, the geological societies. In particular, it's exciting that the Goldschmidt is devoting time to this. And I think this is an opportunity for us to show even all the other science disciplines how strong geosciences are. So I hope that's answered the questions like I was supposed to.
Thank you, Maggie, so much. And at this point, I actually would like to thank Adina. That was her initiative to create all this topic. And I think she is the main engine behind this. Of course, I'm happy to support, but actually that should be big applause going to her and to organize this and to do all this work. And with this, I would like maybe to ask some from our panelists if there are any. Maybe I just see on the screen CLaudio Rachel. Maybe one of you would be so kind and answer these two questions.
Hi, sorry, I've been having technical difficulties. Everyone can hear me? Yeah, okay. I guess the first question is, how have I been impacted by recent events? It's a hard question to answer. I think I've been on maternity leave for several months, so I've kind of been out of the loop and very kind of focused on myself and not really outward looking or really concerned about the geoscience community at large. And it's been interesting to kind of be like yanked back into the conversation at a time where I think probably a lot of people feel this way, is that, a lot of people have been doing work on diversity for a while, and then all of a sudden everyone wants to talk about it all at once, and it's not necessarily the best time for any one person. So while ultimately I'm really glad that everyone wants to be having these conversations, and I've seen like my department at Amherst College and departments that I'm still on email lists from my PhD and postdoc are all kind of getting together and thinking about what, how we can support our students and the few diverse members of our community, and how we can improve. So I think it is good, but it's a lot of work for the people that kind of have put themselves out there in the past for diversity. So I would hope people keep that in mind. But I actually have seen a lot of people that aren't traditionally engaged in diversity really stepping up and taking charge and wanting to have these conversations. So I think a lot of people are getting involved, which is great. And it's actually why, the kind of why I got into diversity in the geosciences, in being active in trying to look at the data, was because it actually really bothered me that the geosciences community didn't see this as an issue, or you'd see kind of the same faces over and over again at the diversity sessions. And it really bothered me because it's just like, how could you walk around any major conference and not notice the huge lack of people of color? And doesn't that bother you? And it just seemed like it didn't bother most people. So I kind of got involved mostly out of principle because I wanted people to pay attention, and I think now they are. So I hope it lasts.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. So maybe we can, Claudia, maybe we can listen to your opinion, and Adina, then we can move further, yeah, afterwards.
Let's let everyone say a couple of words, and then we can move to specific questions.
Okay.
So Claudia, you go.
Yeah. So my name is Claudia Jesus-Rydin. I am a scientific officer at the European Research Council, where I'm also the coordinator of the Gender Activity Group. And more recently, I have been appointed as chair of the newly created Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group at the EGU. I'm Portuguese, so for those that are not fully aware of the European geography, so I come from the very edge of Europe, really what we normally call the tail of Europe, also because in the statistics of performance, we always at the bottom of all the European statistics. It's a country that had 40 years of dictatorship, very hard one, which finished just when I was 2 years old. So human rights issues was embedded very early in my family. So that's, I think, where it comes from. Besides that, in 1999, I moved from Portugal, so edge of Europe, to Denmark with a research grant, a well-known Marie Curie grant. So that was really a cultural shock, I must say. And also my first interaction, my first experience with stereotypes coming from the Southern Europe. Now, why I'm also interested in this topic, in addition to a very basic aspect of simple human rights that we should also all fight for. It's also when I joined the ERC, I could also see the data, especially for gender issues. And that really opened a big question and a big interest to continue following that path and understanding why certain data is the way it is. Now, regarding the question of the latest events, well, in Europe, we see it a bit, I think you primarily focusing on the racist events that are happening in the US and all this movement. I have to say that for me, the latest event is still the pandemics. So we are still in lockdown in Belgium, and we see it with surprise, with shock, because, and for us, we are still dealing with this, with the pandemics and how the pandemics is going to affect so many other people. So for instance, being responsible at the ERC for the Earth System Sciences, I see every day the impact of these COVID pandemics in researchers. For instance, for those that do not have the possibility to carry field work, access to labs for experiments and analysis, and also those who have been juggling their day work with homeschooling and toddler care and any other caring responsibilities, and therefore are unable to do their usual, have their usual activities and productivity. So if I may use this space, I would like to make two requests. One is to journal editors, that they try to monitor what is happening since the lockdown. And also another question is for every academic employer, and how do you intend to factor in this abnormal period when making future judgments about individuals? And if I still have just a little bit of time, I would like to say that, okay, I'm talking about institutional actors, but we should not forget that scientists themselves as individuals are also part of a system that makes decisions about people. You have, for instance, the peer review system, where you make decisions on who, when, and what gets to be published. Another example is also the power in the hands of scientific communities when it comes to recruitment, promotion, mentoring, nomination, and awards. So remember that this is a power that is also a remarkable opportunity to stand above any political flows and do what is right and needed in this era. So I will pass it on to the next speaker.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. It's very, very interesting, and it's completely very interesting perspective. So we would like also to ask Brandon. Brandon, can you come back? And yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. So perfect.
So I want to echo my colleagues who just spoke of all the points that they brought up are certainly valid points, and to those that have joined the session, you see how much work needs to be done, and also a big thank you to Maria and Adina for organizing this session for the Goldsmith Conference. Just to jump into the two questions. So when I first got the invite and the additional information came out, and I saw the pictures of all the speakers and panelists, and I saw that I was the only male. So I thought, oh boy, so here's some pressure to start. But then with all that's going on and what has happened in the last month or so, as a 6'2", 235-pound Black man in the U.S., I'm not really thinking about science right now. And that's I've been trained in that arena. That's what I do at the National Science Foundation. Science, as well as managing programs that focus on inclusion and diversity and everything that we're talking about here in the session. But the real talk is when I'm driving, I don't have the luxury of using brain power to think about the next research project or the next program, or is Congress going to pass a budget that's going to fund science agencies, et cetera. I just don't have that luxury right now because of the obvious. And this is the point to individuals that we would like to attract into all STEM disciplines, and we're talking about the Earth and Space System Sciences now. We have to recognize that we should approach that recruitment or that mentoring or whatever from a trauma-based perspective. These individuals are not able to bring 100% of themselves to the scientific enterprise, so you're not going to get 100% production from them, and it's not their fault. And as many of my colleagues have mentioned before, they're coming into toxic environments, and so some of the some of the programs that I manage at NSF look at not the recruitment and retention of students, which is very important because we certainly need a trained pool of individuals coming in, but it's more at the faculty, departmental, institutional level and dismantling those particular barriers, practices, or what have you that are part of the system, as Claudia mentioned before, that make decisions about where people go, where they are advanced, what support they receive, et cetera. So that's really where the impact of recent events has me thinking, right now, and highlights even more so the importance of all the work that my colleagues here on the session are doing, as well as what we're attempting to do at the NSF. And one last thing before closing, something that has become even more important for me, that's driving me to put it, even more energy into what it is I'm doing, is related to the new level of discussions that are going on, as my colleagues have mentioned, and many of them difficult discussions and hurtful and painful. But what's highlighted is the ridiculous amount of deprogramming that has to go on right now. And so I'm looking at just in the education system in our K through 12, I'd say K through 16, so even up through undergrad, the decolonization of the pedagogies, of the curriculum, of all of that trains individuals, and not just with the students, but the teachers, the administrators, counselors, advisors, professors, all the way through the system, and how so much is perpetuated and how that plays into how individuals relate to one another. And when it comes to science, which is an entity in my opinion, that is attempting to get at the truth of whatever the truth is, with a process that is unlike any other sector in the world, with peer review and reproducibility. There's no other entity, no other sector that approaches truth like science. And with all that's going on, we can't afford not to have all hands on deck with all the societal issues that are going on, all the environmental issues that are going on. And so that's really what's driving me even more so now, is to force the deprogramming so that everyone can operate in the light. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Brandon. It's very, very interesting. So I would like now to invite Rie. She is in Japan, and I think it's 4 or 5 a.m. there. So Rie, if you're still with us, can you please switch on your camera?
Sorry, I'm trying to, but maybe setting is not so available. So can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Sorry, I'm without image. Okay.
Okay.
So,
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Arigato.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Rie Hori. So I am a committee member, diversity committee member, JPGU, and I am also geologist and also paleontologist, and also doing some geochemical analysis of sedimentary rocks. Anyway, so I'm also one of the few Japanese female professor of geoscience. So I'm interested to diversity and also inclusion issues. So, and I'm happy to join this session. And in Japan, most people not so much interesting to heterogeneous, increasing diversity and inclusion, unfortunately. But we have a mind to have to do more increasing up to more diversity. Also, a Japanese committee, geoscience committee, would like to increase, has to have a wide view of much more including a wide range, so not a race, wide range diversity in our community. It's okay. I'm not so.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you
Yeah.
to stay awake and so early in the morning.
Yeah.
And I think.
Sorry, not, my brain not so wake up. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. And now I would like to invite Rocio, I hope I'm pronouncing that's correct. And to all others, please check also the questions in our chat so that we can move afterwards. Okay, thank you, Rocio. It's
Hello, can you hear me okay?
yes.
Okay, good. So my name is Rocio Paula Caballero-Gill, and I'm just gonna run through a little list of the things that I am, because that was one of the questions, and I was like, oh God, this is a little painful at this time. I'm a paleoceanographer and a paleoclimatologist. I am a postdoc at George Mason University. I'm an academic coach. I'm a co-founder, chairwoman, member of the Leadership Council for an organization that's very near and dear to my heart called GeoLatinas for short. The long name is Latinas in Earth and Planetary Sciences. I was also born and raised in Lima, Peru. I'm the mother of 2 mixed children. I'm married to a wonderful Black man. I also have a variable disability because I battle with an autoimmune neuromuscular disorder called myasthenia gravis. I know it's a mouthful. But I mention all of these things because, that was part of the question. All of these things are part of my identity. All of these things relate to how the recent events may impact me either directly or via those I care for. And so, you know, to address the question of why do I personally do this, or why do I think many of us do this? Like Rosie said, you know, we do it for our people. We do it for, at least I know I do. I do it for my children, for my Peruvians, for my Latinas, for my women, for my people with disabilities. And, you know, I'm just one of them. But, you know, when you feel like you're inside the system, you kind of feel that the pride, but also the responsibility to be able to do something about it, fix all the things that are wrong. Not that you can fix it all, but at least to do a little something. It took me about 17 years to actually know more than a handful of Latinas in my field. It took about 7 years post-diagnosis of my chronic disorder, myasthenia gravis, to know another Latina in my field with a chronic disorder. So even though I had a great support system and I've always been lucky to have it, it just took too long to actually meet someone that I could feel I could relate with, you know, or to, that I belong fully somewhere. Not just because I put in my head like, oh yeah, I'm part of this. It was, you know, it just took too long, and it doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way. And so I feel like that's part of the reason why I do the work that I do. To address the impact of the recent events, definitely one of the main things is how and where my time now goes more intentionally in how the conversation is framed. So for example, before, all of the efforts that I had mostly went to, in general, supporting minoritized groups. You know, it was relatively more straightforward to use Geo-Latinas and use that as a vehicle for where does the effort goes, personally, professionally, you know, at both levels, because we can't forget one or the other. And most of the initiatives were, you know, aiming to inspire and support each other, thrive in our own careers, form a community, have a network. And now, because of, you know, all the things that are happening, how they're happening, it's almost like I can reroute the efforts on where my time can go, particularly to tackle both the individual and the institutional change, thinking of both short-term and long-term goals, and also accountability mechanisms. So that's my bit. And I only see my camera. I don't see anybody else.
That's okay. I think now you can see me. I think since we went through a round of questions for everybody, I want to ask a question from one of the participants. This is a question from Peter Botts. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And he wanted to know if the perspective and the attention and the experience that we are having in this discussion of racial discrimination can be used to tackle other discrimination issues, specifically in Europe, issues of LGBTQ community. And the lesson learned from racism could be applied to other type of communities and discrimination. So if anybody on the panel wants to answer this question, we'll do that. I can't see. Oh, Asmaret, go.
Yeah, I was just going to say that centering equity and inclusion is beneficial to address a whole lot of variables that people can be discriminated with, right? Anything on the diversity axis that could be used to discriminate people. So generally speaking, I feel like this moment demands that we think critically and address this glaring issue of racism that has been ignored for too long, right? But generally speaking, the principles of equity and inclusion, I would say, yes, are critical to addressing any form of discrimination, be it discrimination based on sexuality, gender, or anything else that you can imagine.
Thank you, Asmaret. And I want to go to another question that is a little bit broad, and maybe whoever on the panel is willing to start and more than one person can go around. And the question is, in your opinion or from your experience, what do you think is the reason that the geosciences particularly and STEM in general lack diversity? And if you can share one effective example of how to combat this trend. And I know it's a very big question, but if we can just go around, if you've got something to say about that, what do you think is the main reason for lack of diversity and an example of an effective way to combat this trend? And maybe we'll start with Kohli now.
Sure, thank you. In terms of, the main reason, I don't think there's any just one main reason. I think in general, the culture in the geosciences is not very inclusive. It's not inclusive at all. And I think that is the biggest problem. As Rachel very succinctly and eloquently pointed out, that what struck her was people weren't bothered or didn't care that those numbers were so small. So I think the issue is there's this culture that is not very inclusionary, but combined with things like systemic racism and implicit bias and stereotype threat, particularly in the context of, say, Black people having negative stereotypes associated with them. I think those all combine together and just keep these very deeply entrenched biases and forces that way. In terms of one effective practice that might combat this trend, I mean, one needs a multiple pronged approach, but maybe one, if I were to speak very broadly, I would say ensuring transparency in all institutional procedures is perhaps the one key thing that you would need in order to ensure that people, that will help it, because a lot of these decisions are often made behind closed doors by predominantly white leadership, and unless there is transparency in the system, we don't necessarily have a sense of what their thinking is or why certain things happen or why people of color are not appointed to leadership positions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kohli. And Brandon, do you want to share some of your experience or suggestions?
Sure, I agree 100% with what Kohli just shared. I'll go to the other end into the K-12 system. Geoscience content historically and traditionally in our education system doesn't exist. So in the science realm. So everyone probably remembers, if you were in the US and you took science from first grade up to 12th grade, there was an emphasis on chemistry, biology, and physics, mainly in high school, and there might have been a little bit of earth science, and that was mainly rocks or looking at a chart that described talc as the softest mineral and diamond as the hardest, or and it was just performative. And so by the time individuals are introduced to even some kind of next level environmental science or geoscience content, it may be in college, and they might have already decided what their major is or such. So when you're talking about students of color, and maybe they go to a historically Black college, or they go to, after high school, or maybe they go to a tribal college or something, where there just aren't those strong geoscience departments, or they don't have that geoscience content background, there's no connection to geoscience disciplines. There's also no strong connection to an occupation or a job or career. If you major in the geosciences, there's strong connections, and there have been, for good and bad reasons, for physics, engineering, chemistry, biology to be an engineer or a medical doctor, or something like that. But that doesn't really exist for the geosciences. So there's a lot of work to be done, not only on the racial discrimination side of things, but just on the plain educational system that is so broken as far as content and a whole host of other things, so that people of color and people in disenfranchised communities, even rural communities, can see the value of geoscience and earth and space system science, and how that science can be applied in their communities. So there's a lot of work to be done on that side too.
Thank you, Brandon. Let's try to hear about some solutions, maybe from Asmerit and then from Marjorie, from the advanced program and then from the society point of view?
Thanks, Adina. So from the advanced perspective, so our efforts so far in improving workplace climate to address harassment and discrimination in the geoscience in particular has been one that's centered around addressing issues of workplace climate and culture that actually allows discrimination, persistent lack of diversity, and these things to just perpetuate for a long period of time, right? And a big part of this effort then is related to the transparency that kohli already described, right? Having rules in place in terms of how we're actually selecting people for admission, recruitment, and as well as promotion and awards obviously matters, and professional societies in particular are extremely valuable allies to academic institutions in this particular endeavor to improve workplace climate, to set the norms, the culture, the expectation of how we're supposed to be treating one another. One, I think, example for that our team has worked with, in particular, Erica Marin-Spiota has articulated really well, is this idea that academics are really big about people abusing data and text, right? We are not very forgiving about people who plagiarize, rightfully so, but we're not forgiving about people who plagiarize or fabricate data. But we don't have that same level of concern, it seems, and we definitely do not enforce rules to the same level when it comes to mistreatment of people who produce the text and the data. So maybe it's time we make it very clear in collaboration with our professional societies that we expect the very same level of treatment for people as we do for text and data. And that means we actually consider harassment and discrimination as academic misconduct, right? And AGU is making pretty important steps and has made very strong statement in this respect. I think many professional societies are following. And so generally speaking, the approach that we think is the one that we need to highlight is one that addresses the underlying climate and culture issues within our academic institutions and within our professional societies that has allowed for this problem to go on largely unaddressed for very, very long periods of time.
Thank you, Asmerit. Marjorie?
Hi. I think those are all great points that have been brought up, and I can address a little bit about societies. Professional societies offer the opportunity to bring together a large group of people that might have a much stronger voice than individuals. And I think that societies can help us integrate and network across multiple disciplines as well as across really globally. And we set a standard of professionalism, as was mentioned before, that we set an example. And in particular, I think one of our strong audiences are really the young people, the students that are the next generation. They're the ones that we have to reach because in some ways they are the ones that have a lot of the energy and the future to want to make sure that change happens. And I think a strong resource is just the power of cyber technology that we have available today. Social media is giving people voices that they never had before. And if we can capitalize more on using some of the social media and the technology to help make some substantive changes, I think that will really make a difference.
Thank you, Marjorie. So with that note, I think it leads very nicely to a couple of questions that we have from the participants or from the audience in here. And one of this question is from Claudia Cristina Villa, and she's asking, how do early career scientists participate in the dialogue if they're worried about speaking up against the administration or trying to change the way the traditional administration works? And related to that, Jeremy Cooper is actually similarly asking how do early career scientists that want to make a difference get involved in the discussion to kind of facilitate change. So if any of the panelists wants to address that, please, one of these questions or both, please unmute your microphone and go ahead. And maybe some of our early career participants on the panel can go ahead with that, with these suggestions.
I guess that's Rachel and me. So I can go first. Rachel, I don't see you on my camera, but there are many ways as an early career that one can participate. There you are, that one can participate. And it really depends on, I would say after doing this for quite a bit of time, you kind of want to know what your goals are, what you're really trying to do, what you're passionate about, and go with that and connect with organizations. You know, you don't have to try to be in some committee at a big, well-known organization to do something. You can start doing it within your own department, within your own group, I mean, within your own neighborhood. So there are ways to do it. Sure, it helps to have that platform, you know, and in my case, I particularly like to use Yo Latinas as a platform for change, but it's not the only one. And so the point is that depending on what your interest is, then you can go with that. For instance, if you want to make some institutional change, you can perhaps connect with those societies and start asking what are they doing, or connect with other colleagues. And there's always the fear of, what if I say the wrong thing, either upset someone who's directly impacted by the same issue that I'm trying to work towards, or what if I upset someone who's going to be my employer next time around. So you, in a way, you have to navigate that using your network, your mentors, anyone you can talk to. And it really is, it kind of goes back to both the social media aspect of connecting and also the one-on-one messaging, forming relationships to learn how to navigate these waters. But the bottom line is, as an early career, as a mid-career, as any part of, along the line, you don't have to wait to be able, to be something, to do something. You can start something small. Rachel?
Yeah, so I actually didn't really see this as even though it's about early career researchers, I don't really know the answer to this, right? Like, I don't have a permanent position. I'm not tenured, so I don't know if what I'm doing right now is gonna be helpful in the future in my career. And I don't, I think if an early career person is afraid of ruffling feathers by talking about diversity, then that's, especially within your own department, it's good to find like-minded people in your department, hook up with them, and try to get people to talk about the things that you think are important to bring up. Also, I think it's maybe a lot safer to work with professional societies, as other people have mentioned, because you have a really big platform, a lot of other like-minded people to work with. So yeah, I don't know how to answer the question of how necessarily early career people should or could get involved. But I would like that advice too. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Rachel. I think it's not trivial necessarily. You don't want to risk your career, and it's really sad if you're afraid to voice your opinion within the department. It just means that we need some more major institutional change and structure, that people are not afraid to voice their opinion and to foster change. So with that, I'm going to ask Maria to take over and ask some of our panelists some questions that are specifically related to their talks.
I have still one question from the audience, which I think will be very important and interesting. This is a question from Adrian Shan. How are you coping with, or how do you cope with performative action towards diversity and inclusion? and how do you redirect this to make it productive? So if maybe someone of panelists and or maybe Kohli, you can answer that, but I think this is very interesting and important question from Adrian, and then we can go to more specific question.
Sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, sure. Sorry. How are you coping with? How do you cope with performative actions towards diversity and inclusion, and how do you redirect this to make it productive? I think you talk about this a little bit in your talk, and you some suggestions also for this in your talk, but maybe you can summarize it. So
Yes.
thank you, Brandon, also to start.
Yes. One is, so first off, I think we need to acknowledge that what we're seeing right now is something that none of us have seen before. And I think it's really important to take this opportunity and, to not lose this opportunity. So that's sort of the first broad thing. In terms of just, performative theater, I mean, you have a lot of institutions who will just issue statement after statement, and that's what we've been seeing a lot of late, where we're just, there's so many statements that are being issued that we're maxed out of looking at statements, but yet I haven't yet seen a single statement that has resulted in actual action. And unless we're able to translate what is stated in the statement into actual action, it is going to just remain as performative theater and nothing more. So I think this, move and the other thing about moving forward, redirecting the efforts to move forward. The reason why it's particularly difficult in the geosciences is that, we've seen the demographics. We've seen that it is a predominantly white, mostly male field. And so there is also this resistance to talk about things like race and have this knee-jerk reaction that that's not okay to talk about, like, how does it matter what race you are, we're all human, I don't see color, and things like that. And those all come from a place of very good intentions, but don't actually address the issues that need to be addressed. And so if we truly want to move forward, we have to be able to have people be willing to embrace the discomfort needed to have the difficult conversations to move forward, or we're just going to be stuck in that, step one the whole time, issuing statements, saying how outraged we are, but it just stays on there.
Yeah,
that's a really good point. Go ahead, Brandon. Sorry.
No, sorry. Kohli hit that last point was kind of where I was sitting with that. Unless people are willing to do that. So, the question was about redirecting efforts. And I'm thinking, maybe 10 or so years ago at George Mason University, when they came up with the survey about climate change, and the papers and discussion products that came out of that survey, they developed, the PIs developed this idea of 6 Americas within the country. And it was a continuum from individuals on the extremes who were activists about climate change. They certainly believe that humans are causing the increase in CO2, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other extreme were just people who had just dug their heels in about that climate change doesn't exist, it's a conspiracy, whatever. But then there were 4 groups in the middle that were along that continuum somewhere. And for me, I use that model often to say to myself when I'm thinking about how to engage people, I'm not going to focus on the extremes. There's already one group that's in our camp, and then there's a group that's just not going to be, no matter what, even so-called enlightened PhDs. They're just not going to be there. But there's another, so that would be, whatever the percentages are, over 60 or something percent of individuals that I can focus on to begin to have a relationship with, communications with, to share information with, and that's going to take time to develop those kinds of relationships and networks. And the proof will be in the people that stay with that relationship building, even when it gets dark and even when it gets uncomfortable, and understanding that they're in it for the long haul. And then that builds the trust that's necessary to start to dismantle a lot of the pieces in the system that are barriers. And this gets back to an earlier question, not just for people of certain races, but all people that have been marginalized. So that was my 2 cents on that part.
Thanks, Brandon. I just want to put a plug for those of you who have not listened to Andrea Dutton's plenary on Monday. She spent the first few minutes of her talk to talk about Black Lives Matters. And the one thing that I really, really liked about this short introduction of her talk is that she said that in this time and age, for all of us, it's not enough to be happy with the fact that we are sure that we are not racist. That's not enough. We need to do something to feel better. We need to do something more proactive and not just stand there and be complacent that we're not participating in racism. We actually need to solve the problem. So if you haven't listened to her talk, I highly encourage to go back. It's recorded, and listen to at least the first 10 minutes when she's devoting her introduction to her science talk to these issues. Sorry that I jumped in. Maria, back to you.
No, I also enjoy the talk. I also enjoy that her comparison with racism and COVID-19, how actually to address this and how to be active non-racist. And we have 15 minutes. I was just checking a new questions from audience. And there is one new question, so I would love to ask that. It's from Ashaki Roof. I hope I'm pronouncing this correct. This is the question is about DEI. And I will just read it. Work being done in DEI in much needed and overdue. However, I'm increasingly uncomfortable with what I perceive as DEI for appearances or because it is profitable. Have the panelists encountered this inquiry in colleagues or at institution? Does this hurt DEI? Maybe, I don't know who maybe answer this question or give some comments.
Maybe Kohli, because she's working with the diversity and inclusion at the institution level. So do you think people are not necessarily genuine and they do this because there's some call or funding opportunity, or people want to be seen as involved rather than genuinely participating?
Sad answer, that's more common than not, because people do, now there are some people who definitely truly care about the issue. Like, they're very serious and they definitely want to learn. And again, this is a very new space for a lot of people, a lot of white people who, have never had to think about race their whole lives and now are suddenly just waking up to the fact that this is now a national conversation. But then there are people who also, this is more about, oh, I want people to know I'm a good person, and everything around the entire discussion is it's centered around themselves. And if you're familiar with, the conversation on race relations and racial conversations, centering the conversation around yourself to I'm a good person and everything else is secondary is another way of, it's basically another challenge. And so this does happen, but I think I'm somewhat encouraged by the growing number of people I've seen who are truly showing that they care and are willing to move forward with next steps in some form or the other. I think Asmert wanted to say something.
You said it perfectly, kohli. The only thing I was going to say was the sheer number of folks who write they want to increase participation of underrepresented groups in their NSF broader impact statement suggests that there are a lot of people who claim to contribute, to want to do this work. But in reality, our academic institutions haven't really moved, right, in terms of diversity or equity or inclusion on these variables. So I mean, I agree with the person who asked this question that this is an important issue that we have to recognize. There's a bit of a performative allyship that has been going on for way too long. Thankfully, though, it seems like we are at a turning point now. There's a lot more folks who are willing to learn more and embrace anti-racist ideas and actively play a role to change the situation going forward. And I also, as well as at the same time that I recognize that there's a bit of a performative element that has been going on in the community, academic community for a really long period of time, I also want to acknowledge the growing number of people who are really trying to do their best, in particular early career folks, but generally speaking in the community.
Asmerette, I think since we have not too much time, I really want to ask Rosie something specific about her talk, because Rosie has been involved or has been trying to work with Indigenous communities from the get-go to get them involved in a conversation and in looking for solutions. Maybe you can share some of your perspective about that.
Sure. You know, I think kind of dovetailing off of the previous conversation in terms of the ideas of performative nature, one of the things that also is an issue often happens with Indigenous communities and trying to kind of incorporate some of those some of the values is that it can be appropriation as well. So I just kind of wanted to dovetail onto that before going on and speaking about some of the work that we've been doing. So I think one of the things that the field of geoscience has that's amazing is that it has field work as a component, right? We get to be outside, we get to be in the environment, but a lot of times there's these antiquated notions that there's no community associated with the field work that we're doing. So one thing that we've been trying to do at the University of Hawaii at Manoa is to really raise awareness that even if you're going to, you know, a volcano or you're going out to sea, that there is likely a community associated with that. Particularly in the Pacific Islands, there's likely to be an Indigenous Pacific Islander community. And so how do we genuinely engage and have reciprocal rather than extractive relationships? You know, I was struck a lot by some of the earlier kinds of things that were brought up. You know, there was a question of what is the single biggest problem with bringing more people into the geosciences. And for Native communities, we want to have more inclusion and we want to bring in Native scientists into the geosciences, but there's many problems associated with that, right? So one is that if we're researchers going out into the community, what are we investing in that community? How are we increasing the capacity for those communities, for their youth to participate in research, to be included in the research that's going on? So that's just part of the Kulana Noi'i that we've been developing our research standards, right? So we see them as 8 basic standards. The first is respect. There's this essence of reciprocity. How much are we investing? Trying to understand our positionality, because you know, for Native communities, and I think for many communities in general, there's a big question of how does this field relate to my family, to my community? And then in trying to engage in this field, how does the educational system accommodate my culture and my way of knowing? You know, we talked a lot about how the culture, once you get into geoscience, needs to be improved, but just the access into that, you know, for a lot of Native people who have been displaced, or even for other minoritized people who live in urban areas, access to these environmental outside spaces really limits your ability to be exposed. That's not so much of a problem in Hawaii. What's more of a problem in Hawaii is, you know, acknowledgement that what they have learned through their ancestral accreted knowledge is geoscience, right? And so seeing that you know, there's a legitimacy of knowledge. And so some of the work that we've been doing has been to try and establish ethical practices
for how researchers engage, how researchers share their data, how researchers don't perhaps share their data, right? That communities of practice have the right to keeping some of that knowledge within their communities. And how do we be creative about, as scientists, about walking the line between sharing and publishing that research to a broader community, but yet respecting some of the sacred nature of those places. So we've been really successful. I don't know if you guys have seen the talk. We've trained about over 400 individuals at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. We've also had other ones. And, you know, one of, I think, the positive points of the work that we've been doing is that, you know, the work that we've been doing with respect to Sea Grant, which is part of NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, has recognized these research practices as being a best practice nationally, and it's actively being adopted. And I also want to say that I think these practices are good not just for Native communities, but just for communities in general. I mean, there are many places where, you know, we go into geoscientists, not just academic ones, but those who are hired by oil companies or those who are hired by, you know, other kinds of companies for development and extraction of resources. And the relationships with those local communities are not the best. And these practices can be adopted and made effective for those relationships as well. So we really see that these practices that were developed to enhance capacity for a dynamic relationship between Indigenous communities and academia can be adopted, you know, for many other interagency or interentity relationships.
Thank you, Rosie. There's a somewhat related question from Luann Haywood, and she's mentioning that much of the conversation about gender and racial dynamics is rooted in Western systems. And if we want this conversation to go more into the broader international, cross the international boundaries, we need to work with colleagues from other locations, other demographics. And maybe Rie wants to share some perspective of what's going on recently in Japan. And in Japan, the society is pretty homogeneous, but the issue of minorities and underrepresented groups is mostly for representation of women in science. So maybe you can share that, Rie?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So yes, Japan geoscience society looks like a little bit homogeneous and also not so much diversity. Even the gender issue is about the JPGU. Female percent is keep 20%. Not so much increase up in these 10 years, unfortunately. But and also for national diversity, recently increasing up but fewer. So Japan Geoscience Society looks like very closed, but a committee or government, also Japanese government would like to more open for and also increasing up wide range and diversity, and government pushed in the all society and include in particular STEM field to encourage more higher up or increasing of diversity. So sometimes university or has to fix up on the percentage goal of faculty member or academic members has to be 20% female, 20% until 2020, something like. But it is so difficult. Most people has a big unconscious bias, and also they have not noticed or awareness of this existence of unconscious bias. Not only males, not only females. So it's a big program. Also, we have a not good role models. So, for example, not so much female good science teacher. Also, in a university, very few geoscience female professors. So all student, for example, graduate school student, female percent is sometimes 40, but after that, after graduate, so academic staff is less than 15% of in STEM fields. So big gap exists. So yeah, it's all right.
So you've got a ways to go.
Yeah.
We've got only 3 minutes before they're going to close this session because this room is going to be used for the next panelist talk. I just want to remind everybody that we're going to have a similar Q&A open session with all of us. Maybe Rie will be sleeping then, or no, actually now is her sleep time. Anyways, we'll all be here to join with you in about 6 hours. And hopefully you can join us again and we will follow up with more questions. In this last 3 minutes, if anybody from the panel wants to be brave enough and answer a very broad question, and what do you think will be the biggest game changer in increasing diversity and inclusion in the next few years of our career? Anybody wants to try and answer that? Marjorie, maybe you go first.
Okay, well, I think one of the biggest game changers is probably already happened, and that's the new attitude. And what I wonder is, could there actually be something that's a nationwide movement? Just sort of like we have Black History Month. Could we have Diversity Year, where we actually change all the things that we've been doing, but we can do some of these without too much cost. So let's say that for our speaker series in our academic departments, what if we had all diverse speakers for an entire year? Maybe we would also change all of our displays that are typically in our university foyers and such, and change those to things that are focusing on people of color, some of their accomplishments, kind of like a hall of fame. Maybe we actually bring in other dimensions that align with sciences, like how science and music and art go together, and actually bring together sort of a celebration of science with these other communities that really kind of focus on people in their entirety and kind of the contributions that are being made. So that's just one idea, but that was that's a difficult question.
Thank you. These are really great ideas. Anybody else in the last minute wants to chip in and add some more ideas? Rosie, go.
I just wanted to say, I think one of the most important things is because geoscience is, very white male dominated, I think it's important for those people dominating the field, it would be really important to sit back and listen to the voices of the minoritized people in the field. Listen and create space where people can air their experiences in a safe manner. And that way our young scientists can bring up the challenges that they have been having. And I think creating that culture of listening and supporting, I think would be incredibly important for hearing what the problems are and what they have to say.
Thanks, Rosie. Go ahead.
Quickly add to what Rosie just said. That's a very important issue, right? We're in the minority. We're speaking, about these issues for way too long. And it's not that everybody has necessarily been even listening to what we've been saying. What would be a game changer is for members of the majority to amplify our voices and amplify the efforts that minoritized scholars have been doing for way too long in our academic community, and is actually carry the torch and walk the walk, and even beyond talking about it, walk the walk and lead the change forward. That was a great point, Rosie.
Lovely. Any last words from everyone? I think they're going to close our session in a minute, and I hope to see you again in the next session. Thank you again, all the panelists, for doing a great work, and thanks, Maria, for helping with this and leading the discussion. And see you all in about 6 hours, I hope.
Okay, see you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
And
so
don't
much.
forget, we have a chat channel at the Goldschmidt 2020 Discord thing, and I'm just looking at it now. There's lots of input from many participants with images and links and whatnot. So feel free to post anything you want to expand on and share over there. Thank you and bye. Don't forget the panel session now.